It didn't start or end with Roswell. In fact, many countries around the world have stories of crashes of non-human intelligence that rival the intrigue, cover-up, and credibility of the infamous crash that occurred in the New Mexico desert in 1947. Whether this be Shag Harbor, Canada, Maje, Brazil, or others, tantalizing and perplexing stories of UFO crashes are not isolated to the United States. So today, let's investigate a severely underexplored UFO retrieval case that may give us the greatest insights into US craft recovery protocol that allegedly occurred in northern Mexico in Coyame, Chihuahua in the summer of 1974. Hey guys, it's UAP Gerb, and thank you so much for joining me today as we dive into a gripping and underrepresented crash retrieval case commonly referred to by authors as Mexico's Roswell. This case features an astounding tale to rival any case of a downed UAP, a classic crash disk, US Special Forces recovery, a mysterious leaked report describing the event, the death of the Mexican Military Retrieval Force, and much, much more. Is this case that has hardly seen any covering fact or fiction? Join me today as we try and find out. And before we get started, it is worth noting primary sources for this case are few and far between. I will primarily be referencing the work of authors and first-hand investigators into the Coyame case, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, and their book, Mexico's Roswell, the Chihuahua UFO Crash, and follow-up piece, The Coyame Incident, as well as Leanard Stringfield's UFO Crash Retrieval Status Report 7 Part 9, and Ryan S. Wood's masterpiece Magic Eyes Only, which gives this case a medium to high level of authenticity. In the early 1980s, whispers of a 1974 collision between a small private plane and disc-shaped UFO occurring near Coyame, Chihuahua, Mexico began circulating. Tales of dead Mexican soldiers who initially recovered the craft and an American recovering team who relieved the corpses of the craft wreckage began to rise and follow these whispers. In 1994, legendary UFO crash retrieval researcher Leanard Stringfield would state, quote, "I heard of the Chihuahua case before, either in the late 1970s or early 1980s. The only detail I vaguely recall is that the US military team had covertly crossed into Mexico to retrieve the object," end quote. It wasn't until 1992, on an electronic bulletin board, an anomalous document titled, quote, "Research Finding on Chihuahua Disk Crash," end quote, would be posted. Commonly referred to as the Deneb report, which we will discuss in much greater detail later. This shadowy, possibly leaked or purposefully leaked memo of unknown origin details the communications of one JS to all Deneb team members. In early summer of 1993, paper copies of this document would be mailed anonymously to UFO researchers such as Elaine Douglas, who shared the original documents with Stringfield. This anonymous mailing to select researchers reminds me strongly of the origins of the MJ-12 documents. The Deneb report serves as our primary document describing this case. I find it crucial to read this document in its entirety as it serves as the greatest analysis of this mysterious case. Afterwards, we will investigate some of the key aspects of this report and event further. So, without further ado, let's dive right into this 1974 recovery story. To all Deneb team members from JS, date 23rd March 1992, subject, research findings on the Chihuahua Disk Crash, text. On 25 August 74 at 22:07 hours, U.S. air defense radar detected an unknown approaching U.S. airspace from the Gulf of Mexico. Originally, the object was tracked at 2,200 knots, on a bearing of 325 degrees and an altitude of 75,000 feet. A course that would intercept U.S. territory about 40 miles southwest of Corpus Christi, Texas. After approximately 60 seconds of observation at a position of 155 miles southeast of Corpus Christi, the object simultaneously decelerated to approximately 1,700 knots, turning to a heading of 290 degrees and began a slow descent. It entered Mexican airspace approximately 40 miles southwest of Brownsville, Texas. Radar tracked it approximately 500 miles to a point near the town of Coyame in the state of Chihuahua, not far from the U.S. border. There, the object suddenly disappeared from the radar screens. During the flight over Mexican airspace, the object leveled off at 45,000 feet, then descended to 20,000 feet. The descent was in level steps, not a smooth curve or straight line. and each level was maintained for approximately 5 minutes. The object was tracked by 2 different military radar installations. It would have been within range of Brownsville civilian radar, but it is assumed that no civilian radar detected the object due to a lack of any such reports. The point of disappearance from radar screens was over a barren and sparsely populated area of northern Mexico. At first, it was assumed that the object had descended below the radar's horizon, and a watch was kept for any reemergence of the object. None occurred. At first, it was assumed that the object might be a meteor because of the high speed and descending flight path, but meteors normally travel at higher speeds and descend in a smooth arc, not in steps. And meteors do not normally make a 35-degree change in course. Shortly after detection, an air defense alert was called. However, before any form of interception could be scrambled, the object turned to a course that would not immediately take it over U.S. territory. The alert was called off within 20 minutes after the object's disappearance from the radar screen. 52 minutes after the disappearance, civilian radio traffic indicated that a civilian craft had gone down in that area. But it was clear that the missing aircraft had departed El Paso International with a destination of Mexico City and could not, therefore, have been tracked over the Gulf of Mexico. It was noted, however, that they both disappeared in the same area at the same time. Within daylight the next day, Mexican authorities began a search for the missing plane. Approximately 10:35 hours, there came a radio report that wreckage from the missing plane had been spotted from the air. Almost immediately came a report of a second plane on the ground a few miles from the first. After a few minutes, an additional report stated the second plane was circular shaped and apparently in one piece, although damaged. A few minutes after that, the Mexican military clamped a radio silence on all search efforts. The radio interceptions were reported through channels to the CIA. Possibly as many as 2 additional government agencies also received reports, but such has not been confirmed as of this date. The CIA immediately began forming a recovery team. The speed with which this team and equipment was assembled suggests that this was either a well-rehearsed exercise or one that had been performed prior to this event. In the meantime, requests were initiated at the highest levels between the United States and Mexican government that the U.S. recovery team be allowed onto Mexican territory to quote-unquote assist. These reports were met with professional ignorance and a flat refusal of any cooperation. By 2100 hours, 26 Aug 74, the recovery team had assembled and been staged at Fort Bliss. Several helicopters were flown in from some unknown source and assembled in a secured area. These helicopters were painted a neutral sand color and bore no markings. Eyewitness indicates that there were 3 smaller craft, very probably UH-1 Hueys from the description. There was also a larger helicopter, possibly a Sea Stallion. Personnel from this team remained with their craft and had no contact with other Fort Bliss personnel. Satellite and reconnaissance aircraft overflight that day indicated that both the crashed disk and civilian aircraft had been removed from the crash sites and loaded onto flatbed trucks. Later flights confirmed the convoy had departed the area, heading south. At that point, the CIA had to make a choice, either to allow this unknown aircraft to stay in the hands of the Mexican government or to launch the recovery team, supplemented by any required military support to take the craft. There occurred, however, an event that took the choice out of their hands. High-altitude overflights indicated that the convoy had stopped before reaching any inhabited areas or major roads. Recon showed no activity, and radio contact between the Mexican recovery team and its headquarters had ceased. At low altitude, high-speed overflight was ordered. The photos returned by that aircraft showed all trucks and jeeps stopped, some with doors open and 2 human bodies laying on the ground beside the 2 vehicles. The decision was immediately made to launch the recovery team, but the actual launching was held up for the arrival of additional equipment and 2 additional personnel. It was not until 1438 hours that the helicopters departed Fort Bliss. The 4 helicopters followed the border down to Presidio, then turned and entered Mexican airspace north of Candelaria. They were over the convoy site at 1653 hours. All convoy personnel were dead, most within the trucks. Some recovery team members dressed in bioprotection suits reconfigured the straps holding the object onto the flatbed truck, then attached them to a cargo cable from the Sea Stallion. By 1714 hours, the recovered object was on its way to U.S. territory. Before leaving the convoy site, members of the recovery team gathered together the Mexican vehicle and bodies, then destroyed all with high explosives. This included the pieces of the civilian light plane which had been involved in the mid-air collision. At 1746 hours, the Hueys departed. The Hueys caught up with the Sea Stallion as it re-entered US airspace. The recovery team then proceeded to a point in the Davis Mountains, approximately 25 miles northeast of Valentine. There, they landed and waited until 0225 hours the next morning. At that time, they resumed the flight and rendezvoused with the small convoy on the road beside Van Horn and Kent. The recovered disc was transferred to a truck large enough to handle it and capable of being sealed totally. Some of the personnel from the Hueys transferred to the convoy. All helicopters then returned to their original bases for decontamination procedures. The convoy continued non-stop, using back roads and smaller highways and staying away from cities. The destination of the convoy reportedly was Atlanta, Georgia. Here the hard evidence thins out. One unconfirmed report says the disc was eventually transferred to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Another says that the disc was either transferred after that to another unnamed base or was taken directly to this unknown base directly from Atlanta. The best description of this disc was that it was 16 feet 5 inches in diameter, convex on both upper and lower surfaces to the same degree, possessing no visible doors or windows. The thickness was slightly less than 5 feet. The color was silver, much like polished steel. There were no visible lights nor any propulsion means. There were no markings. There were 2 areas of the rim that showed damage, one showing an irregular hole approximately 12 inches in diameter with indented metal around it. The other damage was described as a quote-unquote dent, about 2 feet wide. The weight of the object was estimated as approximately 1,500 pounds, based on the effect of the weight on the carrying helicopter and those who transferred it to the truck. There was no indication in the document available as to whether anything else was visible in the quote-unquote hole. It seemed likely that the damage with the hole was caused by the collision with the civilian craft. That collision occurred while the object was traveling at approximately 1,700 knots or 1,955 miles per hour. Even ignoring the speed of the civilian craft, the impact would have been considerable at that speed. This is in agreement with the description of the civilian aircraft as being, quote, almost totally destroyed, end quote. What was being taken from the crash site was pieces of the civilian craft. The second damage may have resulted when the object impacted with the ground. The speed in that case should have been considerably less than that of the first impact. No mention is made of the occupants of the civilian craft. It is not known if any body or bodies were discovered. Considering the destruction of the civilian light aircraft in midair, bodies may well have not come down near the larger pieces. Unfortunately, what caused the deaths of the Mexican recovery team is not known. Speculation ranges from a chemical released from the disc as a result of the damage to a microbiological agent. There are no indications of death or illness by any of the recovery team. It would not have been illogical for the recovery team to have taken one of the bodies back with them for analysis, but there is no indication of that happening. Perhaps they did not have adequate means of transporting what may have been a biologically contaminated body. Inquiries to the FAA reveal no documents concerning the civilian aircraft crash, probably because it does not involve a U.S. aircraft, nor did it occur over U.S. airspace. It should be noted that the above facts do not tell the complete story. Nothing is known of the analysis of the craft nor its contents. Nothing is known about the deaths associated with the foreign recovery team, nor is it known if this craft was manned or not. Other questions also remain, such as why would a recovered disc be taken to Atlanta, and where did the disc come from? It was first detected approximately 200 miles from U.S. territory, yet U.S. air defenses extend to a much greater distance than that. If the object descended into the atmosphere, perhaps NORAD's space tracking has some record of the object. Alternate possibility is that it entered the Gulf of Mexico under radar limits, then, quote-unquote, jumped up to 75,000 feet. Considering prior behavior exhibited by discs of this size, it is probable that the entry was from orbital altitude. The facts that are known have been gathered from 2 eyewitness accounts, documentation illegally copied, and a partially destroyed document. This was done in 1978 by a person who is now dead. Only in February of this year did the notes and documents come into the hands of our group. End of document. Very little, and I mean very little, is known about the origins of this mysterious Deneb report. As mentioned above, the document first appeared on early message boards in 1992 before being anonymously mailed to researchers such as Elaine Douglas and Nick Redfern. Immediately, copies made their way into the hands of Leanard Stringfield in his sublime crash retrieval status report stating, quote, "Reviewing the text of the report initial JS which follows, I find that it is authoritatively written, using correct military terminology and of note, and unlike a hoax, draws the line between so-called hard evidence and that which is speculative," end quote. What is crucial to remember here is Stringfield had heard rumors of this case around a decade prior. And let's note in Stringfield's own words, when presenting his initial retrievals of the third kind at MUFON in 1978, he was, quote-unquote, informed circuitously by the CIA several days in advance it would be inadvisable for him to discuss crash information in Mexico or West Germany. So the author of this piece, JS, seems to have intimate knowledge gathered by primary sources about the incident and desired the release of evidence to interested parties, i.e. the Deneb team. Is JS an acronym or a name? Well, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte hypothesized JS is an acronym for a department within the US government, such as Joint Staff or Joint Services. Perhaps the Deneb team was a name for an internal USG investigation group during the quote-unquote dark ages of UAP, as I like to call them. We know there is a massive gap of any official UAP programs within USG, from the ending of Blue Book in 1969 to the creation of OSAP/ATIP in 2007. And from the words of Lou Elizondo, we do know unknown UAP programs were operating in the 1980s. Or with recent revelations of the UAP task force utilizing top secret online forums to discuss UAP, maybe the Deneb team was a similar group of intelligence community professionals who used the early internet message boards to discuss obfuscated data on crash retrieval cases. What is also interesting to note is the quote file UFO 3263 end quote, indicating the Coyame report is one of many studied by Deneb and JS. Whether JS is an individual or group with intimate knowledge into the Coyame incident, it seems the author does not have a direct line of information from the named CIA, NORAD, or other agencies we kind of guess, such as the NRO or NGA. The facts were, quote, gathered from 2 eyewitness accounts, documentation illegally copied, and a partially destroyed document. This was done in 1978 by a person who is now dead. Only in February of this year, 1992, did the notes and documents come into the hands of our group, end quote. JS even states multiple times he or they are unaware of the analysis of the craft's ultimate destination, and other details such as the inclusion of bodies. Deneb itself is a highly luminous blue star originating in the constellation Cygnus, one of the eldest constellations recognized by early civilizations. The star is a supergiant with luminosity equal to 60,000 sols or Earth suns. The Milky Way's Great Rift, a critical junction in the galaxy where the Milky Way splits into 2 long sides, begins near Deneb into Cygnus. This particular area held special significance to ancient stargazers, and of particular note, southern Mexico shamans who referred to the rift as Xibalba B, the birth of all life. The Deneb report describes an extremely unlikely chance of a collision between a UFO with a civilian light plane, which is one of the most key aspects to this case. According to the report, civilian air traffic had indicated the crash of a civilian aircraft along the route of El Paso, Texas, to Mexico City. The Deneb team made inquiries into the FAA to identify the airport, but received no documents concluding the plane was of Mexican origin. And unfortunately, examining US 1974 aircraft crashes such as aircraft accident reports from Embry-Riddle University yields no results either. Aviation Safety Network additionally lists no crashes in the year of 1974 occurring in Mexico. Many researchers such as Torres and Uriarte believe the craft to have been a Cessna 180 light aircraft. This is due to the last detection of the UFO by US air defense radar at 20,000 feet or under. Since this aircraft has a service ceiling of 17,700 feet, The authors of Mexico's Roswell guessed the craft to be a perfect fit for a covert, low-altitude, and slow-speed craft. So if this case is real, that likely leaves us with a craft performing illegal operations in a Cessna 180 such as drug smuggling operations. In 1974, anti-drug smuggling between the US and Mexico was an extremely pertinent issue. Let's reference this discussion between US President Gerald R. Ford and Mexican President that occurred on October 21st, 1974, just 2 months after our crash story. The Mexican president states, quote, "Along the 3,000-kilometer border, it is very easy for small planes to take off and land in small private ranches." According to Torres and Uriarte's follow-up book to Mexico's Roswell, the Coyame incident, the two mention the August 1974 death of a 50-year-old Mexican pilot Enrique Riviera Gutierrez, as reported in El Fronterizo of Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua. I've personally been unable to track this paper, but the authors discuss that the man died on August 30th, 1974 from horrific injuries sustained in a plane crash on an unknown date prior to the article. The authors argue this could possibly be the pilot mentioned in the Deneb report, but I find that highly unlikely, due to the collision of a UFO and private plane at thousands of feet altitude. Besides some alleged aircraft parts discovered in the crash region by Torres and Uriarte, we really have nothing to work with here in terms of tracking down this plane. The Deneb reports makes numerous mention to the CIA, quote, "The radio interceptions were reported through channels to the CIA. Possibly as many as 2 additional government agencies also received reports, but such has not been confirmed as of this date. The CIA immediately began forming a recovery team. The speed with which this team and its equipment was assembled suggests that it was either a well-rehearsed exercise or one that had been performed prior to this event," end quote. I am once again drawn to this article by the incredible Christopher Sharp, which accuses the CIA's Office of Global Access of playing a central role in UFO crash retrieval since 2003. The article states the OGA coordinates with Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, amongst others to collect craft. The implication of the CIA in the Deneb report leads us to suspect departments within the CIA have engaged in crash retrievals far before the OGA's creation in 2003. And unfortunately, we can find CIA FOIA requests such as F2007-00637 alleged mid-air collisions near Coyame, Mexico on 8/25 or 26, 1974 with no results. However, we still do have some really interesting clues to pursue. The role of the OGA in UFO crash retrievals as described by Sharp's anonymous source closely resembles the role of the CIA in the Deneb report. According to Sharp's source, quote, "They are basically a facilitator for people to get in and out of countries. They are very clever at being able to get anywhere in the world they want to," end quote. And an additional source of Sharp stated, quote, "The task at hand is simply to get into the custody and protect the secrecy of it. The actual physical retrieval is done by the military, but it's not kept under military control because they have to keep too many records. So they start moving it out fairly quickly into private hands," end quote. In the Deneb report, the CIA gathered intelligence on the UFO and assembled a recovery team who we will later learn may have all been retired US armed forces. The UFO was then taken covertly by an unknown convoy to Atlanta, Georgia, where, by the way, we can find a Lockheed Martin complex located in Air Force Plant 6, less than 30 miles outside of Atlanta. In Lockheed's own words, this location offers, quote, "skunk works work in advanced development," end quote. And while Lockheed Martin was founded in 1995, we can clearly see one of its precursors, the Lockheed Company, engaged in C-130 work in Marietta, Georgia since the 1950s. And what's even stranger here is the existence of the Lockheed Martin Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Laboratory, known as AFP number 67, which served as Lockheed's lab for investigating the feasibility of nuclear aircraft. The site was closed in 1971 and acquired by the city of Atlanta, but this is still a very interesting connection. 2 sources in the Daily Mail told Sharp, alongside JSOC, nuclear weapons experts such as the Nuclear Emergency Support Team, or NEST, perform retrieval operations. With this in mind, the Coyame case reminds me of another case we covered a lot earlier, Jonathan Weygandt. Let's remember the details of this testimony. What is confirmable here is the CIA's involvement in 1997's Operation Laser Strike in Peru to engage counter-narcotics. According to Weygandt, the personnel he encountered after observing a crashed UAP in the jungles of Peru approached him from a nearby landed CH-47 twin-rotor copter. The men's uniforms ranged from black fatigues, DOE rain jackets, and hazmat suits. In this video, I went into why Nest were likely candidates for the team Weygand encountered. A key relation to Coyame here is the presence of hazmat suits and the adverse mental effects Weygand claimed to have suffered, such as intense and unexplainable fear when close to the craft. According to the report, this rapid reaction team was flown from their staging area in Fort Bliss, Texas to the crash site from 4 helicopters, guessed by JS to be UH-1 Hueys and one larger helicopter like a CH-53 Super Stallion. The helicopters were flown in from an unknown location and assembled in a secure area. Crucial to note, JS states these craft were painted a neutral sand color and bore no markings, signifying the vehicles may have been utilized specifically for clandestine operations. Fort Bliss may sound familiar to some, and in fact may be crucial to research moving forward. Fort Bliss is mentioned by Colonel Philip J. Corso in his book The Day After Roswell. According to Corso, debris and bodies from the 1947 Roswell crash were shipped to Fort Bliss, Texas. There aren't many other connections to Fort Bliss and UAP besides a handful of Blue Book sighting, but this really could be some interesting research going forward. And a quick side note, the team was allegedly given intelligence by the CIA gathered from satellite and reconnaissance aircraft overflight of the disk-in-plane collision. Intelligence via plane may have come from the El Paso Intelligence Center, known as EPIC, established at Fort Bliss in 1974, possibly an EP-3E established in 1972. And the satellite imagery, as discussed by Noe Torres, likely came from the fleet of keyhole spy satellites put into orbit around 1971. These satellites were primarily operated by the NRO. Perhaps this is one instance of highly classified, high-res satellite imagery of crashed UAP David Grush has referred to. Curious to me here is how the Deneb report states once surveillance showed the Mexican convoy had stopped and aerial photography showed 2 soldiers laying motionless on the ground, the recovery team's departure was delayed for the arrival of additional equipment, presumably hazard protection and explosives, and 2 additional personnel. Who were these additional personnel, and were they possibly munitions experts sent to scrub contaminated crash sites? Upon securing the craft, the team loaded the vehicle onto a large truck and proceeded to original base for decontamination. But before leaving the site, the Deneb report states the Mexican vehicles, bodies, and civilian light plane were all destroyed with high explosives. This haste to destroy the site, delayed departure for additional crew, and refusal to bring Mexican bodies back for analysis leads me to believe the American recovery team were possibly aware of the contamination that killed the soldiers beforehand and had highly trained explosive experts to sanitize the site. Noe Torres wonders if the explosive used was an MK-54 SADM suitcase nuke. Carrying the smallest yield of 10 tons, such an explosive would effectively sterilize the site while keeping residual effects and damage to local population almost null. After all, in his 2000 paper Radiation Neutralization of Stored Biological Warfare Agents with Low-Yield Nuclear Warheads, Hans Kruger argues fissile debris and fireballs can actually destroy biological agents. Initially, when reading the Deneb report, and still partly to today, I wonder if the US recovery team had killed the Mexican soldiers. JS and Deneb do not have the full picture here, yet seem to have some understanding what happened to the men. Quote, "Unfortunately, what caused the deaths of the Mexican recovery team is not known. Speculation ranges from a chemical release from the disc as a result of the damage to a microbiological agent." End quote. There still remains the possibility that the US team did in fact kill the soldiers in a hasty decision to prevent them from returning to base with UAP debris, and this does warrant further investigation. I can't help but to think back to David Grush, who mentioned numerous times crimes had been committed to maintain UAP secrecy. So if we adhere to Deneb, some contaminant from the down saucer led to the deaths of all soldiers on the Mexican recovery team. Possibly this was due to handling of bodies, reminding me of the police officer who allegedly died after touching a non-human intelligence being in the Varginha, Brazil case. But the report makes specific mention it is unaware if the disc was manned or not. Possibly the contaminant leaked from the quote irregular hole approximately 12 inches in diameter with indented metal around it, end quote, observed on the crashed craft. Fantastic enough, we do have some absolutely fascinating references here. Nestled within the MJ-12 first annual report, lies a passage within Section F, Government Policy of Control and Denial. Here, the Majestic 12 panel cites their concern regarding several SED, Sandia National Labs personnel who came in contact with UFO debris and bodies. One technician collapsed while attempting removal of a body. One went into a coma for 4 hours when attempting to place an NHI body in a bag. All 4 technicians who suffered effects were rushed to Los Alamos, but all 4 died of seizures and profuse bleeding. The report states upon inconclusive autopsies, it appeared all 4 suffered from some form of toxin or highly contagious disease. Extremely disturbing here is point 13, which states, quote, in the opinion of the Senior Atomic Energy Medical Advisor, current medical equipment and supplies are wholly inadequate in dealing with a large-scale outbreak of the alien virus, end quote. But that's not all. I recently spoke about the U.S. Army's brief Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit denied to exist but proven through FOIA requests and only remembered by the Army through institutional memory. This unit was an Army in-house project and an interest item for an unnamed Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence. Well, within Ryan S. Wood's Majestic 12 files, we can find an IPU summary report. This document discusses that all military and civilian personnel dealing with recovery operations operated on strictly need-to-know intelligence. Besides mention of the Kirtland crew performing functions very well, the report discusses severe nervous breakdowns and suicides by MPs. The report then goes on to state, ground personnel from Sandia experienced some form of contamination resulting in the deaths of 3 technicians. So as far back as the 1940s, according to the Majestic documents, technicians and other personnel have actually died from biological or toxic effects from craft and bodies. One of the most fascinating and possibly fruitful aspects of this investigation come from the open-sourced encyclopedia site Wikipedia. Since 2008, Wikipedia featured a brief report on the Coyame UFO crash, referencing the Deneb report, a UFO casebook article, link in the description, and one of our references, Mexico's Roswell by Torres and Uriarte. The entry featured nothing new or noteworthy, and that remained the case until September of 2012 when user Mercy11 radically altered the article, adding names and intriguing details for the US recovery team and crash in general. Quote, at the US Military Radar Airbase, 4 Huey helicopters were readied up as well as a 15-man recovery team headed to Coyame, Mexico. The American group included Captain Lawrence Murley, Lieutenant Randall Bishop, Lieutenant Eduardo Ramirez, Lieutenant Benjamin Rhodes, Sergeant Terrence Miles, and Lieutenant Jerome Smith, all retired U.S. Armed Forces personnel. The group entered Mexico surreptitiously after intercepting a Mexican radio communication giving away the location of the crash site, end quote. Besides the names listed, which we will explore shortly, Mercy11 added 2 spectacular pieces of information. The recovery team included 15 members and all were retired U.S. Armed Forces personnel. This suggests the recovery team was not involving active military, but some experienced, assembled, possibly private industry seasoned operators adjacent to U.S. military and the intelligence community. But Mercy11's additions don't stop here. The user seemingly adds names for all 4 deceased Mexican soldiers. Quote, a short distance from the wreckage was also an olive green Jeep belonging to the Mexican military and containing the bodies of 4 Mexican soldiers in it. The soldiers were Captain Rogelio Arguelles Gonzalez, Sergeant Teofilo Margarito Puebla, Corporal Jose Trinidad Meraz, and Corporal Ricardo Velasquez. Their bodies displayed signs of death by asphyxiation, end quote. And here is where the story gets strange. The author of Mexico's Roswell attempted to reach out to Mercy to discover where the user sourced this information, especially due to the fact existing citation for this section on the history and events cited the UFO casebook article mentioned above in a documentary titled UFO Hunters Unexplained, Mexico's Roswell, the Coyame Crash, neither of which featured any of this information. Uriarte and Torres received a response from Mercy11 in regards to where he found this information, but Mercy doubled down, linking once again to this UFO Hunters episode. Upon following up, Mercy11 stated, quote, I suspect what happened is that I saw the information at some other site, which I had on my screen at the moment, but in another window, which I failed to attribute and record properly, end quote. But again, does not link to this information which I nor any other researcher can find. Soon after these 2013 correspondences, we find the entire page for the incident deleted in 2014 by admin Scotty Wong, who shortly after retired his account. The entirety of this Wikipedia's page's existence is incredibly suspicious, but let's try to analyze the data given. We are given a list of American names and, to be honest, very little to work with. I can find almost nothing about Captain Lawrence Murley, discovering only one Utah-based individual who left for the armed forces near the tail end of World War II. No rank or detail of service are given. Similar data, or lack thereof, is available for Lieutenant Randall Bishop. We can find an Indiana man who lived from 1932 to 2020. Bishop was a Pershing Rifles member while attending the University of Kentucky. He left university to join the U.S. Air Force, where he served in the Korean War as a war zone air traffic controller. After his service, Bishop moved to Indiana to be a teacher, but let's take a second to remember the significance the infographics whistleblower put on the Korean War in the program, as well as the significance of this general area of Indiana. Lieutenant Benjamin Rhodes has almost zero footprint outside of a famous U.S. Civil War soldier. The only somewhat modern-day reference I can find to a Benjamin Rhodes exists within a 1989 issue of American Legion. One Mr. Rhodes out of Delafield, Wisconsin, served as a post commander for the Legion. However, it is unknown whether he was armed forces or not. We can find an active duty reference for one Terrence Miles at the time of April 21, 1993, in this edition of the Guantanamo Bay Gazette. Senior Chief Petty Officer Terrence Miles is mentioned here. Of course, this breaks Mercy 11's claims that all operators were retired U.S. Armed Forces. However, is it possible the sergeant re-enlisted, thus furthering his rank? Zero records are available for one Jerome Smith, but if this was a misprint and we are looking at Lieutenant Jerome Smith, we can find a record. Deceased in 2006, Lieutenant Colonel Jerome Smith served in the U.S. Army and was a World War II veteran. Smith transferred branches of service in 1970 to U.S. Public Health Service, where he achieved the rank of commander before retiring in 1985. We can find a Private First Class Eduardo Ramirez who served in World War II and earned a Distinguished Service Cross for bravery in destroying German machine gun nests with explosives and incendiaries. There is no record I can find of any promotion to lieutenant. And it's key to note, some of these names could be legitimate, all could be legit, or all made up nonsense from Mercy 11. We just don't know at this time with all of our source references. But I am working with prestigious author Ryan S. Wood to really learn how to track down actual service records of previous soldiers who have served, so I may have some update on this in the future. There is only one real lead of the Mexico soldiers' demise, and this comes from Mexican UFO researcher Alfonso Salazar. I am unable to locate this article, but Salazar found a newspaper story from El Heraldo de Chihuahua, dated October 27, 1974, that detailed the death of a group of Mexican soldiers in the crash of a quote-unquote military transport. With Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte's fieldwork on this case, such as finding a piece of airplane debris near the supposed crash site, we do have some witness testimony to analyze, regardless of this crash site being an estimated 60 miles from the nearest town. One such group of witnesses approached Torres in 2012 at a festival in Presidio, Texas. Schoolteacher Johnny Chambers and her 10-year-old son at the time remembered seeing a strange fireball, a quote, big explosion in the sky, end quote, on the Mexican side of the border near the Coyame incident. The two had thought a plane had crashed in the mountain. When interviewed by Torres, John Chambers stated, within a day of the fireball, several residents observed a group of military helicopters traveling back into the U.S. from the Mexican side, including a large twin-rotor helicopter. And I do think it's important to state these witnesses did appear in 2012, 5 years after Torres and Uriarte's initial reporting on the case. These could be false witnesses, but we really have no way to prove. Myriad other witnesses have contacted Torres, such as Melissa P. from Facebook, full name withheld by Torres, who stated, quote, "My uncle was ordered to go to the Mexico Roswell by the U.S. military. He went, came back, and was never the same," end quote. But without names or further evidence, there really isn't much to explore here. And this is kind of the case for many of the witnesses Torres met along his field investigation of the Coyame site. Many people told of strange fireballs, strange events that occurred around August of 1974, but we really don't have too much to work off of. In a frustrating recent event, we can look to Jesus Alberto, Mexican government official who sets up legislation and hearings. Alberto is currently tasked with UFO disclosure and is intimately tied to the Nazca mummies. On March 16th of 2024, J. Alberto posted a now deleted tweet translated to "I have the vid at your time. It's a shit from another world." Some context around this tweet showed it to be referencing the 1974 Coyame incident. I asked J. Alberto if he was indeed referencing the Coyame incident, and if so, would he share the video with me? The only response I got was a thumbs up about the video referencing the crash. In follow-up messages, I inquired how I might get my hands on the video, or if Alberto had any witnesses, military or civilian, I could speak to, or any military documents on the case he might be able to share with me. All requests were met with no response. I'm hoping this video can put some pressure on him to indeed release whatever video he is referring to. What's up, guys? Thank you so much for watching and joining me as we did this deep dive into the 1974 Coyame UFO crash. If you're anything like me, this story is fascinating and super perplexing, with so many interesting details that lead into ufology at large. But at the same time, we're left with very little documentation and resources to investigate this further. Part of the purpose of this video was to lay out the facts as we know of this case: the Deneb report, the alterations to the Wikipedia page, the eyewitnesses, some aspects of the American Recovery Team and the CIA's involvement in other retrieval operations, allegedly, according to Chris Sharp. Put that all out there and see where this investigation can go. I know when this video goes live, I will be tweeting this video at Jesus Alberto, really putting some pressure and asking him to release this video. This case is so interesting. Whatever video this is, whether it's reconnaissance aircraft overflight or any internal Mexican government documents on this case, any sort of video evidence, even if it is a truck convoy of Mexican soldiers entering up north from Coyame around the same date, could prove paramount in adding to this case. I know I said in the video, but I'm also trying to learn from Ryan S. Wood, who I met, by the way, which was awesome. I'll tell you guys all about that more. But in how to access actual service records and personnel archives to learn more about the names listed on the Wikipedia site. And isn't that interesting, those names added? You know, I have scoured the internet. I've gone through every avenue I can trying to find any mention of those names, and when all these names were uploaded together, and from what reference Mercy 11 was citing here. Ryan S. Wood is also in contact with Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, so I will be trying to talk to these authors to learn more and actually talk to them. Hey, did you guys follow up with Mercy? I know Mercy shut them down trying to actually get to know him and so forth, but, you know, let's see what they have uncovered, because that document and their connection with Mercy occurred back in 2011, so who knows what they have uncovered since. What do you guys think of the case? Are there any details I am missing? I still like to play with the fact the US Recovery Team actually killed the operators, the Mexican Recovery Team. I know that the Deneb report states that there was likely the chemical or biological agent that killed these guys, and we also have the IPU and Majestic documents to kind of reference there. And isn't that interesting, the Sandia lab technicians? I know the MJ-12 likes to reference Sandia at Kirtland Air Force Base quite a bit, as we saw in the Eisenhower briefing document in the 1950/1955 El Indio/Del Rio crash retrieval cases, which are pretty interesting. But you know, the idea of being contaminated by craft and suffering ill effects is something I'd like to explore further. Remember in the whistleblower, the infographics whistleblower video, this whistleblower stated one of the first things that people do upon receiving a downed craft is send in a team to analyze for any toxicity or any hazardous chemicals surrounding the craft. It stands to reason this Mexican recovery team, if they had never recovered a craft, went in with soldiers with no additional protective gear and thus died from exposure. But what if the American recovery team did kill these soldiers? But let me know what you guys think about the involvement of the American recovery team and the case at large. I'm willing to bet a lot of you guys haven't really heard of this case, or just kind of heard it in passing a little bit. I can't exactly remember the first time I ever heard of this case, but I think it was when the UAP caucus listed a list of crash retrieval events to kind of pay attention to and to bring before Congress. And I think either from there or from an offshoot of there, I heard of this case. And quickly afterwards, I dove into it and found it so fascinating, especially just some of these details, like a craft and a small passenger plane colliding. I know this story just requires a couple pieces of evidence to help verify further. That's why it's so frustrating. As well as diving into the origins of the Deneb report. Elaine Douglas, the researcher I spoke about who actually received the Deneb report, she passed away in 2014. She had a website. It was www.elainedouglas.com that actually had documents. I think it had a scan of the original Deneb report. When she passed, apparently her family was going to maintain her website, but no, the website is available in the web archive. I will link it in the video description, but if you try and go to the links to the Coyame incident, those are all missing. So that's very frustrating in itself. Ryan S. Wood also doesn't have the copies of the original document, because it would be very great to put these kind of through a forensic test as Wood does with the MJ-12 documents. But anyway, guys, again, let me know what you think about the case. Do you have any other details I glossed over in this? Because I've really tried to scrounge as much as I can for any information on this case. Coming up, guys, a lot of interesting videos, a lot of crash retrievals I'm going to focus on, a lot of hidden programs. I'm going to do a video on the IPU. Now that I've met with Ryan S. Wood, we are going to do a video on the MJ-12 documents. A very kind of comprehensive documentary, an overview of the MJ-12 using his expertise. I also want to make a video solely on the Majestic 12 Special Operations Manual I spoke about in the last video, which Ryan Wood considers to be the most crucial piece of the MJ-12 documents. Besides that, of course, crash retrievals, hopefully some good interviews coming up. I hope so. We'll see about that. But thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. You know, if you feel free, join the Patreon. I'm not charging for any extra content or anything. Only support what you think the channel is worth. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye now.